them that discipline. So they know throughout their day that there are things that they have to do. You tell them between the hours of such and such, 5 and 7, you will go to the tahfiz al-Quran and memorize the Quran. In the morning when you get up, that you will memorize one of the ahadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. From the hadith al-Arba'un of the Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah ta'ala, masalan, for example. Or you will memorize Thalathatul Usul of Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul Waahid. Second 7 years of a child's life. Discipline, discipline, discipline. Doesn't mean that you can't play with them. Doesn't mean you can't smile with them. But this is the era of discipline for the children. Then he mentioned the next 7 years from the age of 14 to 21. This is the age of suhbah. Now he's your companion. Why? Because you had your 7 years of play. So he knows your mercy. He knows that you stayed up with him when he was ill or when she was ill. He knows that when he was not able to feed himself that you fed him. He knows that you took him out to play. Then the second 7 years, this is the age where he knows that he's been disciplined. He's been taught. He knows how to respect, how to honor, how to treat the shaykh. He knows how to sit in a dars. He knows how to take notes, because that was the second 7 years. So therefore in the third 7 years, from the age of 14 to 21, now it's suhbah. Now it's companionship. Now he's your friend. Wherever you go, he goes. Sometimes he drives the car, sometimes you drive the car. You make istishara with him. You make this consultation with him. You ask his opinion. When he reaches a certain age, my son, what do you think? My daughter, what do you think? Do you think that we should go to London on this path? Or shall we go to Umrah? Which airline should we? You start making istishara with them. Because now he's your companion. Sometimes what happens is that we play with them from the age of 0 up until the age of 14. Just play, laugh. From the day that they're born up until the age of 14, I've heard parents say to me, Akhi, but he's still young. Let him play. 14, 15, Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they used to be with the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and they used to say, Ya Rasulullah, let us participate in jihad with you. And the Prophet ﷺ used to measure them up, see if they were big and strong enough, and mentally capable enough to enter into jihad at the ages of 12 and 13 and 14. And we're saying to our peers and each other, no, but he's still young, he's still a child. Why? Because we've mixed up things. We don't know how to give the correct tarbiyah. Sometimes it's not even the parents' fault. It's just that they haven't been taught, or they haven't thought, and they haven't looked at the way of the Salaf, how they were with their children. Or they haven't read between the lines. Sometimes you read a narration from the Salaf that so-and-so at the age of 12 he got married, and then you move to the next sentence. Stop there for a moment. Age of 12? Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul Waahid rahimahullah ta'ala. At the age of 12 he was the Imam, he was leading the prayer in the masjid. Memorized the Quran. And his father married him up at the age of 12. Shaykh al-Islam Muhammad bin Abdul Waahid rahimahullah ta'ala. Now you say to parents that your child is ready to marry. Does it mean they need to get them married tomorrow or after the weekend? No. It means that they're ready to marry, meaning what? Meaning that the age of responsibility has come upon them. It's not now daddy doing everything. It's not now something happens that the father can't go away because he just got little children. Now he's a man. The signs of manhood are 3. Or the signs, should I say, of adulthood are 3. Manhood, the signs are many. Many signs. And many people don't possess them. And that's why they can't be given the title of, or given the description of rajula, or manhood. But the signs of adulthood are 3. Coarse hair growing upon the private areas. Or night emissions, meaning that they're able to have sexual intercourse. Or thirdly, that they reach the age of 15. Whichever one of these 3 comes first, he has entered into adulthood. And the woman, there's one more for her, and that is menstruation. Whichever one of these 4 for a lady come first, then she has entered into adulthood. And we have to recognize these signs in our children. So as I mentioned, when we were looking at the biography of Abu Bakr ibn Abi Dawood, he mentioned that he was born in the region of Sijistan, because you all know Abu Bakr ibn Abi Dawood was the son of Abu Dawood al-Sijistani, Sahib al-Sunan, the compiler of the Sunan of Abu Dawood. So this is his son, Abu Bakr ibn Abi Dawood, born in the year 230. That is almost exactly, 1,200 years ago. That this Imam, he was born in that time. Which year? 230. Because this is going to come in handy when I mention the next narration. Born in the year 230. Abu Bakr ibn Abi Dawood rahimahullah, he said, as-Sijistani, he said, my first writing, my first compilation of a book was in the year 241. How old was he? 11 years old. As I say, sometimes you read these narrations and we don't ponder. 11 years old and the boy had already written his first book regarding the life of Muhammad bin Aslam al-Tusi, rahimahullah ta'ala, the great Imam. He mentioned he was in Tus and he was a righteous man. My father was delighted with me due to what I had written about him. This is a father who is what? Encouraging, enthusiastic. That I wrote a biography of one of the Imams. And my father looked at it, and my father who was an Imam. Look at all the benefits just in that jumla there. At the age of 11, what kind of father, what kind of tarbiyah would have necessitated to have been taken place for a son to say that I had written my first work at the age of 11, and that my father read it, and my father was delighted. So that shows what kind of tarbiyah was coming from the direction of the father. That the father was encouraging. And he mentioned that my father was delighted with me due to what I had written about him. And my father said to me, the first thing that you have written about a righteous man. So the first thing that you wrote was a book at the age of 11. Our children, too busy on Wii and Xbox and this box and, this game and that game. Where is the writing of our children? Not to say, of course, that every single one of our children will make these ta'lifat, that they will start writing these books and these writings. But even if you just sit to your child and say, listen, here's the biography of Imam Ahmad, I'll give you half an hour to read it. Then I'm going to take it away from you, and then I'll give you an hour to write whatever you recall from what you have read. Benefits. How many of us do that with our children? And then after he has written it, then you ask him, why did you point out that thing? What made you focus about all the biography of Imam Ahmad you read for half an hour? And in the page or 2 pages that you wrote, why did you focus upon these points on the life of Ahmad? This is encouragement of the children. How many of us do that with our children? Because the more that our children are introduced to the Salaf of this ummah, to the biographies of the Salaf of this ummah, the more enthused they'll become, the more encouraged they'll become, the more that they will become, for the use of, a better term, they will become their heroes, even though maybe that's not the most ideal term to use with regard to them. That they will become their role models, instead of these modern day fussar, the likes of, these Beckhams and football stars and, whatever their names are, from the football league. That's some of our children, wallahi, if you tell them, name 11 Imams of the Salaf. And tell them I'll help you along the way. Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Malik ibn Anas, Imam Shafi'i. Name me another 8. They'll say, Dad, you just named all the 3 that I knew. I don't know anymore. Bukhari? Yes. They get stuck. Now tell them, name me the first team for Manchester United, or Liverpool, or Everton, or Man City. And you find our children, Wallahu musta'an, they'll reel them up as if it's second nature to them. Our children, Salafiyun. It's not something to be proud of, ya ikhwan. Some of the Salaf, the likes of Abu Zur'a al-Razi, and we'll come to him in a moment, that they could see, if someone brought them a piece of paper like this, and on the back of it was the diagram of the isnad, of the chain of narration going back to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They would see the shape of that of that branch or of that tree, going back to the Prophet ﷺ as a chain of narration. The likes of Abu Zur'a and Abu Hatim al-Raziyain, they would see it from a distance, almost like where I'm putting it now, and the second row. And you would not be able to read the writing. But they would decipher just by seeing the shape of the image, and they will tell you the isnad from sitting there. And you say, how is that possible? I'll tell you how it's possible. It's the same thing that happens to our children. That our children, in the middle of the night, with no street lights, they will see a car driving in the distance. And they will say, Abi, that's a Mercedes 320 SL. 2008. That's what they'll say. Say what? Walad, how did you know that? I said, I don't know, Abi, I just know. It's true, they don't know how they know, but they know. It's not as if they've been looking at cars in the night and memorizing them like you memorize Quran. They haven't. It's because their enthusiasm for cars and their love of cars has caused them to recognize the shape of a car from a distance away. Just draw an image of a car, just the silhouette of a car, with no labels, no names, nothing. Just the silhouette of a car presented to a child at the age of 10 and 11, he'll tell you, Mercedes, BMW, Ford, Mustang, whatever, he'll tell you. Our Salaf, you present to them a chain of narration, not of course all of the Salaf, but those who were raised upon ilm and knowledge, that they were raised that you could show them an isnad, and they will tell you whether this isnad is something which is sahih, to what matan or what matun it is connected to, and without even looking at the names they'll tell you. And this is something that used to happen to the Salaf of this ummah, like what happened to Imam al-Bukhari, that when the people used to gather around him, that they used to take 100 hadith, and they used to mix the isnad with the matan. So one of them would stand and he would say, Akhbarna fulan, Haddathna fulan, Akhbarna fulan, going all the way back to the Prophet ﷺ. And then he would say that the Prophet ﷺ said such and such. Imam Bukhari would give them a look. He would say no. Next one would stand up, 100 hadith. And he would not say anything to them. And then what he would do, he would say, as for the first one that stood up, then that isnad goes with the 13th one that stood up. And as for the 13th one that brought his matan, then that is connected to the isnad of the 49th brother that stood up. Just like our children know the Mercedes-Benz in the distance, or the BMW in the distance. The Salaf, the ulama of the Salaf, that this is how they used to try to raise their children. Look at this narration. He said, I witnessed the funeral of Ishaq ibn Rahaway, and Ishaq died in the year 238 after the Hijrah. What year was he born? Ibn Abi Dawud, 230. He went to the janazah of the companion of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, Ishaq ibn Rahaway, who died in the year 238. How old was he? 8 years old, and he witnessed the janazah of an imam of the sunnah. Again, our children, you say, no, don't take him to the janazah. He might get troubled afterwards. He might have nightmares. Yeah, ikhwan, death is a reality. Not of course that we, scaremonger our children, but they have to know, when the people of Fadl, they die, that we witness the janazah. We witness the janazah generally of the Muslimun. Ishaq ibn Rahaway. He said, and I was with his son in elementary school. So he studied with the son of an imam, Ishaq ibn, his father was an imam. He studied in elementary school with the son of an imam, Ishaq ibn Rahaway. Raising your children right from an early age with good companionship. Good companionship, my brothers and sisters. If there's anything that I've noticed in all the years that I was teaching at the tuition center, Islamic studies, in all the years that I noticed, any of our youth that went off the rails, it was due to bad companionship. Weak parenting and bad companionship. Or a mixture of the two, or one of the two. Sometimes the parents are good, and they try their best, but the child falls into bad companionship. He went to school with the son of Ishaq ibn Rahaway. Then he mentions, then it is mentioned with regard to him by Imam al-Zahabi and others, that Imam Abu Bakr ibn Abi Dawud, that he travelled with his father out of Sijistan, travelling to the lands of the east and the west in search of knowledge. And he listened to and benefited from the scholars during that time. His father kept him close to him. His father went to the Hijaz, he went to the Hijaz. His father went to Mecca, he went to Mecca. His father went to Egypt, he went to Egypt. And this is mentioned by him himself. He benefited from the scholars during that time. So he heard and benefited from the lands of Khurasan, modern day Afghanistan and Iran. From Asbahan, modern day Iran. Naysabur, from Basra, from Baghdad, from Kufa, from Mecca, from Medina, from Sham, from Egypt, and the Arabian Peninsula. That he traveled to all of these areas with his father. Because his father was collecting hadith. So he went with his father, so he would benefit from whatever his father used to benefit from. He was a person of extreme and immense resolve and determination, right from an early age in scholarship and learning. It's no wonder that he had this zealousness for ilm. Because his father from the beginning, the only thing that he saw, the only sight that he saw was ilm, was knowledge. Knowledge of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is the predominant knowledge, which is the most important knowledge, more important than science, more important than economics, more important than engineering and chemistry and physics and biology. The knowledge of the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the most important knowledge. That your son, that he died upon poverty, in poverty that he died, with barely a penny to his name. But he dies upon the sunnah, upon istiqamah and sidq. And he dies upon righteousness and wara and piety, is better than that he dies a fasiq with huge amounts of wealth. Which is better out of the two? You know, which one would I prefer for my son? Ask yourself the question. A son who's poor but he's righteous. Because the poor and the righteous will enter into Jannah first. The fuqara from the muhajirun, as the Prophet ﷺ said, will enter into Jannah first, and the gates of Jannah will be open for them first from the muhajirun and the ansar, the fuqara. Why? Because they were focused upon ilm, upon ibadah, upon istiqamah. He mentioned a narration that he mentions, I heard, this is Abu Hafs, Umar ibn Shaheen, who was a student of Ibn Abi Dawud. He said that I heard Abu Bakr ibn Abi Dawud say, he said that I entered into Kufa and I had only with me 1 dirham. 1 dirham I had with me. So he said with that 1 dirham, I bought 30 handfuls of beans. With 1 dirham, I bought 30 cupped handfuls, 30 mud of beans. He said that I ate a mud a day from it. And I would write 1,000 hadith a day from Abu Sa'id and Uthman. By the end of the month, I had gathered 30,000 hadith. Those between munqati' and mursal. Those that were between those who were disconnected, meaning disconnected in the chain itself, and those that were mursal, meaning that those were narrated where a sahabi radiallahu anhu is missed out in the chain of narration. 30,000 hadith. He mentioned that I memorized in Asbahan alone 36,000 hadith. I memorized in Asbahan 36,000 hadith. This is a father who had concern for his son. A son who only had 1 dirham in his pocket, but he had 30,000 hadith in his heart, just from one place, Asbahan. Which one would you prefer, ya ikhwan? A son upon the sunnah, memorizer of the sunnah, defender of the sunnah, the likes of Abu Bakr ibn Abi Dawud, or the likes of a fasiq, who has no concern except the concern for women and music. Like you find many of the shabab today. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide them. There's a narration also that has been reported by al-Khatib in al-Faqih wal-Mutafaqih. A narration from the great Imam Hassan al-Basri rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the year 110 after the Hijrah. He mentioned seeking knowledge, meaning making hifd, memorizing the knowledge in a young age is like inscribing it upon stone. If you inscribe something on stone, is it ever going to disappear? So when a child in early age is taught knowledge, then it is like you have written upon stone, engraved upon his heart. Statement of Imam Hassan al-Basri. There is also a narration reported in the Manaqib of Ahmad from Ibn al-Jawzi rahimahullah ta'ala, that he mentioned that Abu Bakr ibn al-Matu'i, he said that I frequently used to visit Imam Ahmad, Abu Abdullah Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And I used to visit him frequently over a period of 12 years, whilst he was reading his Musnad to his own children. How many hadith in the Musnad of Ahmad? Over 40,000 hadith in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. And here we have this Shaykh mentioned that I used to visit him over a period of 12 years. And when I used to enter upon him, he was reading his Musnad to his own children. Reading the hadith that Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal had gathered. He said that I did not write down a single hadith from him myself. 12 years I visited him. I did not write one hadith from him in 12 years. Rather, I used to observe his conduct, his manners, and his etiquette. And this is why he has narrated this to us. How was Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal with regard to his children? He used to sit them down and he used to read the Musnad to them, engraving in their hearts the knowledge of the Sunnah and love for the Sunnah. We also find many of the narrations of the Salaf with regard to this affair. The likes of Abdul Rahman ibn Amr al-Awza'i. You all heard of Imam al-Awza'i rahimahullah, the great scholar of Beirut in Lebanon. Died in the year 157 after the Hijrah. It is mentioned that Imam al-Awza'i rahimahullah ta'ala, that he was born and he was raised as an orphan in the house of his mother. His father had died. So he was raised as an orphan by his mother. And then the narrator mentions al-Walid ibn Mazyad rahimahullah, he said, yet kings would be unable to cultivate their children to the standard of his manners. I never heard a noble word from him except that it was such that whomsoever heard it would write it down from him. Nor did I ever see him laughing loudly. When he would mention the hereafter, I would say to myself, can any heart in this gathering be seen not to be weeping? This is the mother who has raised her son, single mother. Many of our sisters, they say, well, I don't have a father for my child. Well, sister, you can be like the mother of Awza'i. That even the kings could not give the tarbiyah that this woman she gave to her son. Al-Awza'i went out in a party to Yamama as a youth, meaning to defend the borders as a youth. So he met Yahya ibn Abi Kathir, the great Imam, and he said to him, leave now and go to Basra. Where is he? He's in Yamama. He said, go to Basra, go to Iraq, to Basra, and try to catch Hassan al-Basri and Muhammad ibn Sirin, these two great Imams from amongst the Tabi'een. So he wanted to catch these two from the Tabi'een. So he said, as a youth, I went and I raced towards Basra. And by the time I'd reached, I found that Imam Hassan al-Basri had died. And I visited Muhammad ibn Sirin, and he was sick, and he was ill. This is Imam al-Awza'i in his youth. This is a mother who has raised her son upon the Sunnah and upon a desire for knowledge. We have that which has come from Sufyan bin Sa'id al-Thawri rahimahullah, the great Imam who died in the year 161 after the Hijrah. He was the Shaykh al-Islam, the Imam of the Huffaz, the Mujtahid. He, rahimahullah ta'ala, the most noble of scholars who acted upon their knowledge. He was born in the year 97 after the Hijrah. He began seeking knowledge as a boy due to the care of his father, the Muhaddith, Sa'id bin Masruq al-Thawri. You see the thread again, that if the father is upon knowledge and upon istiqamah, then the son, he will raise his son upon that knowledge, upon that istiqamah. If the father loves hadith, then the son will love hadith. If the father loves the ulama and visits the ulama, then the son will likewise love to do that. The number of times, my brothers and sisters, that we have performed Umrah and Hajj, The number of times that we have visited our mashayikh, and many of the brothers, they bring their children. Wallahi, 5, 6, 7 years later, that same child will say, Wallahi, I remember when I was sitting in the house of Rabi ibn Hadi, when I was sitting in the house of Shaykh Abdul Muhsin al-Abbad, that I saw Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, that I met Shaykh Ubaid al-Jabari. I saw how they were. A child who met them at the age of 5 will remember them at the age of 12 and 13. That if the father is upon ilm, if the father loves knowledge, then the son likewise will follow his father. So Sa'id bin Masruq al-Thawri rahimahullah, who was the student himself of Imam al-Sha'bi, and he was counted amongst the smaller tabi'een. So this was again a father with a desire for knowledge, teaching his son knowledge. Abu al-Musanna, he said, that I heard them say in Marwa, that al-Thawri has arrived. Al-Thawri at that stage, Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah, was still a youth. But the people of Marwa, that they decided, that they said to each other, that the people started saying, al-Thawri has arrived, al-Thawri has arrived, meaning Sufyan al-Thawri has arrived. So this, Abu al-Musanna said, so I went out to see him, and I saw that he was still a very young man. The hair of his face had just begun to appear. The hair upon his face had still begun to appear. Imam al-Zahabi said that he used to be spoken well of whilst he was young due to his great intelligence and his memory. He narrated hadith whilst he was still a boy. Sufyan al-Thawri. Now when we look at our children, do we say about our children, mashallah, my son's narrating hadith? My son is recalling hadith? My son, when he's sitting in front of his mother, that he's telling his mother, you know what mother, I learned this today. I learned about the life of Imam al-Bukhari. I learned this from the seerah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We don't hear that from many of our children, because we don't give that focus. As soon as the child comes in, the mother will say, have you done your chemistry homework? Forget the chemistry homework. Go and learn the hadith of the Messenger of Allah. Go and learn the aqidah. Go and learn the fiqh. Go and open the fatwa of Shaykh bin Baz, Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen, Shaykh al-Albani. Go and learn something from them. Go and learn the seerah. Go and learn the lives of the companions. Do your chemistry homework later, after all the important stuff is done. Do your English homework later, after the important things are done. Because this knowledge, the knowledge of the deen of Allah, inscribe it into their heart. Why do you think that the non-Muslims, they have this system of sending the children to school before even the child can hardly talk? Send them to preschool, they call it. The child can hardly gurgle a few words from his mouth, but they still want to put him into school, because they know whatever you teach from an early age, we like inscribing into stone. Whatever you put into that child at an early age is inscribed. He will not leave it, he will not forget it. What we say is, let them do what let them learn their science and their economics and whatever else. And then when they're older, when they're in their 20s, then we'll go and send them to Shaykh Ubaid, or Shaykh Muhammad ibn Hadi, or Shaykh Rabi'. Then we'll send them. Ya Ikhwan, this is twisting. And this is turning the correctness of an affair upon its head. The most important thing for our children is the deen of Allah. Is it so difficult, my brothers and sisters, every evening to gather your children around you, all of them? Doesn't matter how tired you are. I don't care how long, my sister, you have been slaving over the stove. My brother, how long you've been working throughout the day. Half an hour with your children every evening without fail. That you read something to them, or you memorize something with them. An Amir al-Mu'mineen, repeat. An Amir al-Mu'mineen. An Amir al-Mu'mineen 10 times. They repeat after you 10 times. Abi Hafs Umar ibn al-Khattab, Abi Hafs Umar ibn al-Khattab, Abi Hafs Umar ibn al-Khattab. Repeat it. So they repeat it half an hour every evening. Translate it for them. It's a hadith translated. If you don't have knowledge of that and you don't have the ability, open up a book and read it to them. From the fatwa of Shaykh Abdul Aziz bin Baz, Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen, from the fatwa of Shaykh al-Fawzan, so they benefit. Half an hour every evening. Your child will begin to inscribe these things upon his heart. Another Imam, Sufyan ibn Uyayna, rahimahullah ta'ala. Sufyan ibn Uyayna, He was from the third generation of Muslims. And he began seeking knowledge as a boy. As a boy, he used to sit with the older tabi'een, from the students of the companions. And he took a great deal of knowledge from them. He heard from 70 of the tabi'een. And he was born in the year 107. So the tabi'een in the year 107 were getting old, many of them. The later tabi'een. Yet, he was born in the year 107. So he must have been sitting with the tabi'een before he was 10 years old. He was sitting with the tabi'een. And how many of them? 70 of the tabi'een he met from the students of the companions of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sending the children to the scholars. Now Shaykh Ubaid is in his old age. If any of you have children that have not met Shaykh Ubaid, then take that advice that was given to Imam al-Awza'i. Hasten to Basra, to Hassan al-Basri and Muhammad ibn Sirin. Hasten to Ubaid al-Jabri. Hasten to Shaykh Rabi'. Hasten to Zayd al-Madkhali. Hasten to them so you may catch them. Hasten to them, because those scholars are scholars of old age. Make your children meet them, so you can say that I narrate from Ubaid al-Jabri when I met him. I narrate from Rabi' al-Madkhali because I met him. I narrate from Salih al-Fawzan because I went to his dars. Look now, Shaykh Abdullah Ghudayan rahimahullah ta'ala, the Allama, the Shaykh, the scholar, who taught us in this masjid for over a year, maybe 2 years, Kitab al-Tawheed. This Shaykh rahimahullah ta'ala, many of the brothers when you speak to them now, say, have you met Shaykh, did you meet Shaykh Abdullah Ghudayan? Say, no, akhi, wallah, I didn't meet him. I heard him in the telelink, but I never met him. And I wish I'd met him. Because when the scholars, they go, the heart, it yearns for them, wallahi. For the heart that is attached. The heart that is not attached to Man United, Man City, and Chelsea and Arsenal, or even Accrington Stanley. A heart that is attached to the scholars. That we attach the heart of our children, our youth, that we attach it to the scholars. But the heart of the youth, how is it going to be attached to the scholars if the heart of the elders isn't attached to the scholars? How is it going to attach? There's a dawrah every year. In fact, there's dawrat in Medina every year. Most of them in Arabic. But we go every year. And that dawrah is translated into English. Every year. After we come back, the brothers say, Akhi, how was the dawrah? I say, Wallahi, it was jameel. Wallahi, it was a fursa. That you know, alhamdulillah, I reached it. That it was an opportunity that I caught. So did you take your children? Of course I took my children. Did many of the brothers go? So yeah, maybe 100. And they took their children, they took their wives. Which were the mashayikh? Shaykh Rabi', Shaykh Muhammad bin Hadi, Shaykh Ahmed Bazmoul, Shaykh Salih al-Suhaimi, Shaykh Abdullah Bukhari. So these were the mashayikh that we sat with, Shaykh Ali Nasr al-Faqihi and others. Say, Akhi, next year, definitely. Put my name down now. Say, Akhi, we still got 12 months. No, put my name down now. Okay, no problem. Akhi, you don't see the man for another 11 months. He said, when's the Umrah? Say, it's next month. Said, Akhi, you know what, I can't really go this time. Put my name down for next year. Dawrah ilmiya, ya ikhwan. Not just for the sake of Umrah. Umrah in itself, of course, is an expiation of that which is between the one Umrah and the next Umrah. Umrah, as the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, wipes away poverty. But also ilm and knowledge with the scholars, with the mashayikh, that your children see them. And your children from a young age. Wallahi, I can say, Shaykh Ubaid al-Jabri picked up my daughter and kissed her when she was 3 years old. And you remind your children, you were picked up by Shaykh Fulan when you were 3 years old, when you were 2 years old. Shaykh Ubaid made dua for you, Shaykh Fulan made dua for you. He put his hand upon your head and made dua for you. Shaykh Rabi', that you sat right next to him in his dars when you were 5 years old. And the children, when they're inculcated upon this, but not just at the age of 5 and 6 and 7 and 8, all the way through, up until you reach that stage of suhbah with you and your child. That stage between 14 and 21, when he becomes your friend and your companion. Likewise, my brothers and sisters, we have that which has been narrated from Abu Zur'a al-Razi, rahimahullah ta'ala, the great Imam and the scholar. It is reported that Al-Hafiz, Abu Ahmad ibn Adi, rahimahullah, he said that I heard my father say that I was in Ray, that I was in Ray, in this village, in Perj, modern day Iran, that I was in Ray whilst I was still a young man, amongst the cloth traders. So as a young man, I was in Ray. And a man swore an oath that his wife would be divorced unless Abu Zur'a al-Razi had memorized 100,000 hadith. So this is a young boy, listen to the conversations of the people. In which field? In the field of knowledge. That a man said, that wallahi, my wife, she's divorced from me if Abu Zur'a al-Razi has not memorized 100,000 hadith. So some of the people, and he said, and I was amongst them, as a youth, that we went to Abu Zur'a al-Razi, and we asked him about that. So he said, what would lead a person to make such an oath involving divorce? Why has he put me in his oath for divorcing his wife? So he was said to him, well, he's done it now. So what are you going to do? If you've memorized 100,000 hadith, then he's still married. If you haven't, he's lost his wife. So Abu Zur'a said, then let him hold on to his wife. He is not divorced from her. Benefit, one Abu Zur'a, that he had memorized over 100,000 hadith, so much so that a man, not correct of course to make these kind of oaths, but a man was willing to say that if he has not memorized 100,000, I'm divorcing my wife. So he'd memorized over 100,000 because Abu Zur'a said, you don't have to divorce your wife. Secondly, that this, Abu Ahmad ibn Adi, that he mentioned that his father, that I heard my father say, meaning Adi, that I was as a youth, that I went to Abu Zur'a al-Razi rahimahullah ta'ala. Again, ya ikhwan, being in that environment of knowledge, where are you going to get that environment? From the streets? Make your children tullab al-ilm, not tullab of the shawari. Make them awlad of the masajid, children of the mosque. Do not make them awlad of the streets, of the shawari. Keep your children away from the streets. Keep your children away from bad company. We also have that, the advice of Sahl bin Abdullah al-Tustari, rahimahullah ta'ala. That Sahl said, he said that when we saw the students of hadith, that when we saw the students of hadith, that we said, strive that you should not meet Allah except that you have your ink pots. That a student of knowledge, a youth, should always have with him a pen, should always have with him a daftar, a book, or a notepad, where he can always be writing benefits. Make it a habit of your children, that when you bring them to the masjid, that they carry with them their masjid notebook. Even if there is not a dars, that just in case there is some benefit that can be gained, someone that they meet from their teachers, that they can ask them a question and write it in their notebook. So the children come into the habit of having their ink pots with them, of being individuals who are constantly upon knowledge, as Abu Bakr al-Khatib al-Baghdadi rahimahullah ta'ala, who was born in the year 392 after the Hijrah. That his father Abu al-Hasan was a Khatib. His father Abu al-Hasan was a Khatib. Khatib al-Baghdadi's father was a Khatib as well. And he was from those who learned recitation of the Quran from Abu Hafs al-Qattani. So he encouraged his son to sit and hear the narrations of fiqh. The father encouraging his son, Khatib al-Baghdadi, ya ikhwan, from the greatest of the scholars of the Ummah of the 4th century, from the greatest of the scholars of Salafiyah and Hadith of his era, that his son encouraged him right from an early age to hear the narrations of fiqh. He first heard narrations at the age of 11 years old, and he traveled to Basra at the age of 20, to Naysabur at the age of 23, and in middle age to Sham and Mecca and other places. So this now shows that he began upon that tarbiyah Islamiyah, the tarbiyah of seeking knowledge, the tarbiyah and that cultivation of loving knowledge, wishing to be around the people of knowledge. But how is a child going to do that, ya ikhwan, if you just dump them to the street? That you just leave them to the schools, or you just leave them in the house to do as they wish? That half an hour a day, ya ikhwan, giving your children that tarbiyah Islamiyah, that true correct Salafiyah, so that child grows up with the love of Salafiyah and hatred for bid'ah. There's that beautiful narration from Yunus bin Ubayd, that Yunus bin Ubayd, he saw his son walking out of the house of Amr ibn Ubayd. Amr ibn Ubayd was the head of the Mu'tazila, a deviant, a person of bid'ah that all of the scholars used to warn against. So much so that one of the ulama, he was upon his deathbed and he started weeping to him. Why do you weep? Are you afraid of meeting your Lord? He said, Wallahi, I don't weep because of the fear of death. I weep because I met Amr bin Ubayd, the Mu'tazili. He gave me salam and I returned the salam, and I fear that Allah will call me to account for returning the salam to this innovator. So Yunus bin Ubayd, he saw his son coming out of the house of an innovator, Amr bin Ubayd, the Mu'tazili. And he said to his son, "Oh my son, Wallahi, it would have been easier upon my soul that I saw you walking out of the house of a lewd woman than that you have walked out of the house of this innovator. Were that you were to meet Allah as a fasiq, as a fornicator, as a thief, would be more beloved to me that you meet Allah with one of these ideas of bid'ah, of the likes of the Mu'tazila." This is the Salaf with regard to their children. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal said that the fusaq of Ahlul Sunnah, now this is of course in comparison to the people of bid'ah, that the fusaq, that the sinners of Ahlul Sunnah, that they are the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because they are people of Sunnah, even if they have sins with them. In conclusion, and there is much that can be said about the relationship between the father and his son, but in conclusion, ya ikhwan, I've given lecture after lecture about the rights of the parents. Those things that you need to inculcate in your children right from an early age is that the child and your children sit in front of you like a student sits in front of his shaykh. That he does not speak except that you permit him to speak. He does not shout and he's not rowdy around you. And some of these adab and some of these etiquettes were those etiquettes that were mentioned by our Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Waahid al-Aqir, hafidhahullah ta'ala, from the scholars of Medina, in some of the durus that we had with him. That he mentioned that the son, that when he sits in front of his father, that he should not look into the eyes of his father. You know, like some of the children, you tell them up, and he looks in your eyes, like he's trying to, I don't know, some sort of courage that he's trying to show the father. The child, right from a young age, don't look. If your father's telling you up, or he's admonishing you, or your mother, then look down. Don't look into their eyes as if to challenge them. Be humble with them. And you need to inculcate that in your children. Teach your children that. If I'm telling you up, don't look at me. Look down. And feel humble and humility at the fact that you are being admonished, so that you may rectify yourself. Likewise, that a child, when he's sitting in the company of his father, that he should be sitting in the company like he's sitting in the company of the mashayikh. Ya ikhwan, if any of you have sat with a scholar, or sat in front of the mashayikh, you do not point your feet at the shaykh. You raise your feet up like that in front of the shaykh. So the soles of your feet are pointing towards the shaykh. But you don't point your feet, you don't raise your feet in front of the scholar, because this is the adab that is not mamduh. This is not something that is praiseworthy. So much so that many of the scholars, they take from the narration of Jibreel alayhi salam, when he came in the form of a man, in a very white thobe and very black hair. And what did they say? فَجَلَسَ إِلَى نَبِيِّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم. And what did he do? That he, Jibreel alayhi salam, that he sat with his ركبتي إلى ركبتي إلى ركبتي, with his knees, with the knees of the Messenger of Allah, not feet, knees at the knees of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَوَدَى كَفَّيْهِ عَلَى فَخِذَيْهِ, and he put his hands, the palms of his hands, upon his thighs. This is the adab of the student with his shaykh. Some of us, that we allow our children to behave in any manner. If you don't teach them respect at a young age, don't point your feet at me. Don't raise your feet at me. When you sit in front of me, you sit up in front of me with adab. Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Waahid al-Aqir, hafidhahullah, also mentioned that when you're about to enter into a building, that the son, that he stands back and allows his father to enter first into a building or into a room. When the guests come, that the father, he teaches his son to serve the guests. Not that he's just jumping around the room like some sort of nutcase, like some sort of delinquent. Wallahi, sometimes you enter into the house of some brothers and the child is 8, 9, maybe 10 years old, and he's running around like he's still in his nappies, causing havoc and screaming and shouting, answering his father back. This is not adab that is being taught to the children. If he's behaving like that at the age of 9 and 10, how is he going to be when he's 16 and 17? Is he going to get better or worse? So the child, that when the guests come, that he's an exemplary example of what a good son should be. Or if the sisters, a good daughter should be. That she sits down and she does not talk and she does not chatter. That when she speaks, she seeks permission from her mother. If she wishes to leave the room, that she seeks permission. The father likewise, that when the food is served, that the son, he serves his guests, the guests of his father. Likewise, that even the friends of the father, they are treated with respect. Many of you, maybe you know the narration of Abdullah ibn Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhuma, that after the death of his father, the Amir al-Mu'mineen Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu, that he was riding into Mecca, and he had with him his camel and his donkey. So he was riding upon the donkey. When he became tired, he rode upon the camel. And as he was entering into Mecca, he came across a Bedouin. And the Bedouin said to him, "Are you the son of Umar?" He said, "Yes, I am the son of Umar." And then he started telling him about his relationship, meaning the Bedouin, and the closeness that he had with Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu. So Abdullah ibn Umar, he had upon his head a turban, an imamah upon his head. So he took it off and he gave it to the Bedouin. And then he came off his donkey and he gave the donkey to the Bedouin. And then he said, some of the people, they said to Abdullah ibn Umar, "What have you done? You've given your donkey to a Bedouin, and you've taken off your turban and you've given it the imamah and you've given it to the Bedouin." He said, "Indeed, that this is what I heard from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, with regard to the good treatment of the companions of your parents after they pass away." So even after your parents pass away, that the son, he remembers that even though my father has died and my mother has died, I should give good treatment to those individuals who were the companions of my mother and father, like Abdullah ibn Umar did, showing good treatment to the Bedouin who knew his father. These types of manners, my brothers and sisters, that these are lacking in the society that we're living in. In the society that we're living in, where the child is taught to backchat and answer back and swear and use foul language, even to the extent that I've heard situations, not amongst the Salafis, walillahi alhamd, well I hope not amongst the Salafis, where a child is taught that don't call me mum, just call me Trish. Huh? Don't call me mum, just call me Shaz, because we're friends. So now even that respect, that barrier of respect between the father and the child, or the mother and their child, is removed. So much so now that they argue with each other, that a child will argue with his father, and maybe even swear at him, call him names, backbite him behind his back, his own father or his own mother. This is because in that first we mentioned the 3 stages. You remember them? Or are we going to forget them? The 3 stages. Because in that first 7 years of playing, then the second 7 years, they were not followed up by tarbiyah and discipline and teaching good manners. So therefore the child begins to think that he can speak to his mother and father in any which way that he pleases. Brothers and sisters, that the tarbiyah of the awlad is from the most important affairs. That will catch them young, keep them close to you. As soon as you come back from work, it doesn't matter how tired you are, ya ikhwan, this is the investment for your future. Because your son, as the Prophet ﷺ said, the righteous children who make dua for their parents, all of the deeds are cut off, except for those few. And from them is the righteous children that make dua for their parents. So raise the children upon righteousness and piety. They were just chasing the dunya. That we're just interested in the GCSEs and the A-levels for our children. That's the only thing that we're interested in now. Deen doesn't mean anything. You see our youth now, youth that I even used to teach, earrings in their ears. Wallahu musta'an. Many of the children in our community, not necessarily many of them Salafi, but just, children that we used to see, that were young and they were coming across, they used to memorize the Quran. Some of them even memorized the Quran. Used to sit in the durus. Now they listen to music, going to clubs, mixing with girls, earrings in their ears. Something's gone wrong, ya ikhwan. Something's gone wrong. Yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala writes guidance and misguidance for every individual. But that does not remove the obligation of striving. Obligation of striving. One of the first things that is lost, ya ikhwan, is this desire for knowledge and tawheed, and knowledge of the aqeedah. Make your children hungry for this knowledge. Make your children competitive for this knowledge. Make that in them. Keep that in them. And keep them close. Don't make them distant from you. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us and guide our children. And guide the next generation upon sunnah and salafiyah. Because this da'wah needs men who will carry the da'wah. I'm so